And for more insight into the terror in Paris, homegrown terrorism, and foreign fighters, I'm joined now by Douglas Smith. He used to work for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, among other things. Welcome back to the show, Douglas. Within the hour, we are hearing reports that the United States is now issuing a worldwide travel alert following the recent attacks in Paris, Australia, Canada. What does this signify? Is this anticipating a credible threat, or are they already getting credible threats?
I think it's probably a little of both. I think number one, it's abundance of caution. When something like this happens, they're going to react quickly. Number two, the fact that if in fact it's true that it was AQAP who took credit and it was successful in this, it's a pretty scary thing because they've had numerous foiled attacks that if they've proved to be successful. I think above and beyond, though, it's making sure the traveling public is aware and paying attention.
Want to turn back to that because in the beginning there was talk, could these guys be acting alone? Are they lone wolves? Is this homegrown terrorism? But now we're hearing these claims of responsibility by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and so forth. What does this say? Is this part of a bigger plan? Is this part of a larger cell? What are your thoughts?
I think time will tell, quite honestly. I think it's interesting that once the dramatic effects of this began to play out, whether AQAP was responsible or not, it's great PR for them. And that's what they're in for. As we've seen before, and we saw with ISIS, these terrorist groups like to take credit. Now, if in fact they were responsible for it, it is kind of a scary trend. The fact that they helped train these gentlemen, they helped potentially supply the arms, I think it's something that's going to really put a lot of international law enforcement intelligence services on alert. How
are they having to change the strategy in trying to identify people like this? It's really changing the face of terrorism, isn't it?
I think the strategy is the same. What's going to change is engagement. I think many of these people, they were on, for example, our no-fly list to come to the United States. And I think the French, we're tracking them. What's going to happen is a tolerance level for engaging sooner. The French authorities knew all about them. The question was, how soon could they push, and how soon would the public be willing to let them push onto them? So I think while the investigative techniques will stay the same, the way they engage sooner will change.
But isn't that what we've seen lately in various attacks around the world, in Canada and Australia? The people seem to be behind them have been on the radar of law enforcement authorities, and we've seen that there are tens of thousands of people on all these watch lists, all these no-fly lists. So how does that get managed? I mean, isn't it overwhelming?
I mean, you nailed it. The challenge is there are tens of thousands of them on the watch list. And one of the challenges in an open and free society, whether it was the attack in Sydney, the attack in Ottawa, is it's an open and free society. And if there's only so much the general public will allow in terms of law enforcement to crack down. And I think that's going to require some adjustments. The U.S. obviously took some hits a number of years ago on some of the leaks around how they listen and investigate. People were very concerned about it. I think all of a sudden people are going to start thinking, maybe that's not such a bad idea. If they can find out what these guys are up to sooner rather than later, perhaps we can avert disasters like this.
And this isn't over yet. I mean, it's still unfolding. For all we know, that there might be a fourth person still out there on the run. Every day brings another aspect to what happened in Paris. Now there's a third person. Now there's a fourth person. Can you talk about what you think we'll find here? Will we see French authorities going into certain neighborhoods where some of these guys lived and try to sort of root out other potential people who may have been involved?
Well, they've already been doing that. There have been a number of arrests already as part of this investigation. I think they will do even more. But I think you'll see it across Europe. I mean, in Spain alone, the Spanish announced that they believe 3,000 or so of their citizens have traveled to Syria to fight. We've seen it in Great Britain and in Bulgaria, et cetera. So I think throughout all of Europe, particularly the Interpol-connected countries, they will be working much more aggressively to root this out. I don't know if you remember during the London Olympics, the British spent a lot of time proactively reaching out into community mosques to try to meet with imams who were very sensible to try to track this way early on. I think we'll see that a lot now. The question will be, will there be a backlash? And I think that's one of the things the French government's going to have to be very careful on, because for the majority of Muslims living there, they're law-abiding citizens, and they're going to need them on their side to help them track down these few outliers.
It's a fine balance. You can't turn them into enemies. That brings to the point of foreign fighters, as you touched on earlier, the fear of these people going overseas, training and coming back, which is what they're thinking happened with one of these two brothers. Can you talk about the West's concern for this going back and forth and the coordination that all these countries will have to have? I mean, you can't seal the borders.
And particularly in Europe with the EU, it's very, very difficult. But it's a huge concern for them. They have been tracking this, and they will track it even more. But once they go, they get even more training and makes them even more lethal. I mean, some would say, let them stay over there, let them fight. But I don't think that's a particularly realistic solution because they're going to come home eventually. And they tend to move about depending upon where things surge. When the Russians fell in Afghanistan, they moved to a new direction. And I think that's the thing they're going to have to keep tracking.
All right, Douglas Smith, as always, we appreciate your time and your perspective. Thanks for joining us here on the show.